Here's your story, rewritten to be sharper, tighter, and more cinematic, while keeping every beat you built. Same bones, stronger muscle. Title: The Corner Table. My brother didn't introduce me at his wedding like a sister. He introduced me like a stain. He dragged me through a ballroom full of linen and money, his hand clamped around my wrist as if I might bolt and ruin the pictures. His smile was bright enough to pass for charming, if you didn't know the man behind it. You have to meet my future father-in-law, he said. Words sweet, grip not. The place was a countryside club outside Baltimore. Manicured lawns, chandeliers, glass doors open to the night. The kind of venue where even the silence has a dress code. Inside, the air smelled like citrus cocktails and expensive perfume. The industry people stood in clusters like well-fed sharks. Baltimore is my home, not the postcard version, the working version. Port cranes against a gray sky. Freight yards that hum after midnight. Rails threading through the city like veins. That's my language. Flow, bottlenecks, timing. I'm Scarlett, 34, a transport network optimization specialist. I look at a mess of containers, trains, handoffs, contracts, and delays, and I can tell you where the blood is pooling. I don't post about it. I don't do conferences. I just fix things that cost millions when they go wrong. My family doesn't understand any of that. In my family, success is loud. Job titles that make strangers nod. Photos, ceremonies, being impressive at dinner. My brother Cooper is all of it. Corporate manager at a prestigious logistics company. Polished, social, the kind of person who makes you feel lucky he's letting you stand near his life. He's marrying the daughter of Victor Halberg, a multimillionaire who owns a logistics empire up and down the East Coast. Port terminals, rail contracts, cross-country freight. My parents have been floating for weeks like balloons tied to Halberg's name. And me, I was invited the way you invite something you don't want people to notice. The seating plan proved it. My place card waited at a corner table near a decorative column, far from the head table, half-shadowed, like I was a staff member on break. Mom saw me approach and smiled like she was trying to remember how. You made it, she said. Her eyes scanned my dress the way she used to scan my report cards, hunting for something that would let her feel disappointed. No +1, she asked. Just me, I said. Dad leaned in, voice low and paternal in the way that always meant control. Try not to make it about you. I stared at him. When have I ever had the chance? He looked away as if my question were rude. Cooper slid up beside me a minute later. He didn't sit. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just looked at my table and smirked. Corner, he said. Makes sense. I laughed once, dry. Who decided that? He shrugged. It's a big night, Scar. Halberg people, investors, the whole corridor crowd. Just don't be weird. Define weird, I said. He lowered his voice, still smiling like we were posing for cameras. Don't tell anyone you're my sister. There it was. Clean, casual, like asking me to pass the salt. I felt my face go hot, then cold. What? He tapped the table lightly. Don't make this a thing. His family is old school. They like polished. So I'm not polished. He tilted his head like he was indulging me. You're intense. And your job, no one knows what that is. It's awkward. It hit me the way it always does. The polite cruelty that sounds reasonable until you realize it's just contempt wearing manners. You dragged me here, I said softly. I invited you, he corrected. The smile sharpened. Be grateful. Dinner rolled out in expensive waves. Toasts, laughter, business gossip traded like intimacy. I tried to disappear into my corner, tasting my own bitterness with each bite. I watched my parents lean into Halberg's orbit like worshippers, Mom laughing too loudly, Dad nodding too hard. Then Cooper appeared again, brighter, louder, a man stepping onto his stage. Come on, he said. His hand closed around my wrist. Cooper, shish, he hissed under his breath and dragged me away from my corner table like I was a loose thread he needed to tuck in. Heads turned, smiles followed. I could feel the room noticing me for the first time, and it wasn't curiosity. It was entertainment. We reached Victor Halberg near the center of the ballroom. He stood with a small group of men in tailored suits, the kind who speak softly because the world leans in to hear them. Silver at his temples, broad shoulders, calm eyes that looked like they'd watched storms and bought the insurance. Cooper's grip stayed on my wrist. Victor, Cooper said warmly. There's someone you should meet. Victor turned with the practiced courtesy of a man used to introductions. His gaze skimmed me once, the fast inventory people do when they decide whether you matter. Cooper's grin widened. This is our family failure. He said it like a joke everyone was supposed to share. Mom stepped closer, eager to play her part. We don't brag about her, she added with a light laugh, as if apologizing for my existence in the room. Dad chuckled in solidarity. For a second, it could have passed as harmless teasing. The guests' faces held polite amusement. Someone near us let out a small laugh. Victor Halberg didn't. He looked at me again. Not a skim, a study. My pulse thudded loud in my ears. I kept my chin level because if I lowered it, the room would feel like it had won. His face changed. Not slowly, like a realization creeping in, but sharply, as if a memory had grabbed him by the throat. His hand, mid-gesture, stilled. His mouth parted slightly. He froze. The air around us thinned. Conversations dulled. I could feel the room noticing me now, and it wasn't entertainment anymore. Then Victor spoke, quietly. Not a crack. So it's you, he said. This is unexpected. Silence hit like a dropped glass that never shattered. Cooper blinked hard, his smile slipping. Sorry, what? Victor didn't look at him. He looked at me, eyes locked, recognition plain as a bruise. I swallowed. Have we met? Not in person, Victor said. But I know you. Mom's laugh came out wrong. Oh, well, Scarlett does, she does little projects. Dad stepped in, smooth. She's always been quiet, doesn't like attention. Victor's gaze didn't waver. No, he said, almost to himself. She likes results. Cooper forced a laugh, too high. Victor, she's harmless. Victor's head turned, sharp. Harmless, he repeated. The word sounded ridiculous in his mouth. That's an interesting description for someone who saved my company. Cooper went pale. I stood there, my wrist still warm from his grip, trying to understand how a man like Victor Halberg could possibly know my face. 8 years earlier, I wasn't Scarlett to anyone important. I was a night dispatcher in an outsourced call center. Fluorescent lights, stale coffee, headset dents in my hair. I made barely enough to cover rent and student loan payments that felt like a joke. Then a hurricane slammed the East Coast. Ports closed, containers stacked into mountains, rail lines clogged. Every hour of delay bled money out of companies like Halberg's. Phone lines screamed, carriers threatened lawsuits. Dispatchers read scripts that sounded like lies, because they were. Between calls, I started mapping the chaos. Not because I believed I could fix it, because watching a system collapse makes my brain itch. I pulled open public rail maps, yard capacity reports, carrier lists. I looked for secondary nodes, smaller junctions, overlooked yards. I built a crude model on my old laptop. Split the flow, rerouted through less obvious rail hubs. Used regional carriers for short legs. Stitched the network back together like a patched artery. One weekend, I wrote an algorithm and a report. Then I found a generic email address in Halberg's directory, and sent it. No greeting, no plea, just the logic and the map. I expected nothing. I got nothing. A month later, I quit the call center. My name disappeared into turnover and trash bins. I told myself the email had been deleted by someone too busy to care. Apparently, it wasn't. After the wedding, Victor's assistant found me near the terrace and guided me to a small private room. The door shut. The music outside became muffled, like the world turning its volume down so reality could speak. Victor Halberg sat across from me, hands folded. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. I owe you, he said. I let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. You don't even know me. I know the work, he replied. Your rerouting model during the hurricane saved 3 major contracts and kept our network from collapsing completely. We implemented it company-wide. We still use the logic. I stared at him. Something in my chest tightened. Not pride, exactly. More like grief for the years I spent being treated like nothing. Our couldn't find you, he continued. Dispatch center's outsourced records were incomplete. High turnover. Your name didn't show in our system. Because I wasn't anyone, I said, voice small despite myself. Victor's eyes narrowed. You were someone. We just didn't know how to reach you. He slid a folder across the table. After a recent merger, we're seeing anomalies, he said. Routes that don't make operational sense. Costs spiking without justification. Contracts with intermediaries appearing out of nowhere. His voice cooled. Someone is breaking the network on purpose. My fingers touched the folder. It was heavy with data, and with something else. A problem with teeth. I want you to audit our system, Victor said quietly. Independently. Find the leak. I hesitated. That's a big ask. It's a big contract, he said. But I don't think money is why you'd say yes. He was right. Money matters, sure, but curiosity matters more. Pattern matters. Truth matters, when you've been lied about your whole life. I nodded. I'll do it. When I got home to Baltimore, my office felt smaller. My row house. One room with a desk, 2 monitors, and the steady soundtrack of distant freight. I logged into Halberg's systems. And started doing what I do best, turning chaos into a map. By the first night, the pattern whispered. Routes were detouring through unnecessary nodes, real segments that increased dwell time without adding capacity. Regional partners with thin histories and thick invoices. Brokers charging expedite fees for delays that looked engineered. On paper, it was explainable. Congestion, weather, operational friction, corporate buzzwords. In the data, it was clean. Too clean. Deviation clusters. Repeating vendors. The same corridor. The same approvals. By the third day, I could trace a money-shaped shadow through the system like a fingerprint. Then I saw a name. Cooper. My stomach dropped as if the chair had vanished under me. His division controlled the regional contracts tied to the highest anomalies. His approval sat on vendor agreements with carriers that had no real capacity, shell companies, middlemen, detours that generated fees and service charges that went somewhere else. Not the company. I stared until my eyes burned. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. I wanted to believe my brother was just stupid, not corrupt. But Cooper has never been stupid. He called that night. I let it ring. He texted. Heard you're consulting for Halberg. Call me. I didn't. The next morning, he showed up at my door like he had every right. Perfect. Suit. Watch. Haircut designed to reassure strangers he belongs in rooms with power. His smile was tight. Scar, he said. We need to talk. We don't, I replied. He stepped closer anyway, lowering his voice like we were sharing secrets. Victor is not someone you play with. You're stepping into corporate warfare and you don't even know it. I kept my face neutral. What are you afraid I'll find? His eyes flickered, just once. Then he reached for his favorite weapon. We're family, he said, soft, intimate, like an apology. I almost laughed. My chest ached anyway. Family didn't stop you from calling me a failure. His jaw clenched. That was a joke. It was entertainment, I replied. You needed them to laugh at me so no one looked at you. His smile vanished. You don't know what you're talking about. I leaned slightly forward. I know the routes are engineered. I know the vendors are fake. I know the detours create costs that don't belong to operations. I paused. I know your name is on the approvals. A pulse jumped in his temple. He swallowed. Then tried another angle, practical, cold. Okay, let's say there are irregularities. You can frame it differently. Soften it. The board doesn't need the whole picture. So you want me to lie? I want you to be smart, he snapped, then forced his voice down. Do you understand what you'll do to mom and dad? To the wedding, to everything. I stared at him. The irony almost hurt. You already did it, I said. You just expected me to carry the blame, like I always have. For a second, his eyes looked scared. Then anger flooded in to cover it. You've always needed to feel superior, he hissed, because you couldn't stand that I was the one who made it. I let out a short laugh. You made it, Cooper, you couldn't row a grocery cart. His face reddened. You're jealous. Of what? I asked softly. Of being so empty you have to humiliate your sister in public just to feel tall. He leaned in, voice low and poisonous. If you do this, you'll regret it. Victor only likes you because you're useful. I didn't flinch. Get off my porch. He held my gaze, then smiled, thin and ugly. You'll regret this, he said again. And walked away. Mom called within the hour. Her voice was sweet, which is how I know she's dangerous. Sweetheart, she began, we heard you're working with Mr. Halberg. Isn't that exciting? It's work, I said. Well, she rushed on, this could be such a blessing for the family. Cooper is starting his life and I'm not doing this for Cooper, I cut in. Her sweetness cracked. Scarlett, don't be selfish. The word hit me like an old slap. Selfish, I repeated. Dad took the phone. Scarlett, he said, calm, authoritative. We can handle this quietly. As a family. Quietly, I said, like hiding me in a corner at the wedding. He ignored it. Cooper made mistakes. People do. You don't blow up everything over paperwork. I looked at the network map on my screen. Containers, rails, money, the truth drawn in lines. It isn't paperwork, I said. It's theft. Dad's voice hardened. If you do this, don't expect us to be there when it comes back on you. I smiled, but it wasn't nice. When have you ever been there? Silence. The board meeting took place in a glass conference room overlooking cranes and tracks. Victor Halberg sat at the head of the table with the stillness of a man who doesn't negotiate with rot. Board members shuffled papers like shields. Cooper sat halfway down the table. Posture straight, jaw tight. He didn't look at me. Victor nodded once. Miss Scarlett, he said. Show them. I stood, plugged in my laptop. The screen filled with a map of the corridor network, ports, yards, rail nodes, distribution hubs. It looked like anatomy, like truth. I walked them through the deviations. The engineered detours. The inflated invoices. The brokers that shouldn't exist. The money flow that followed the distortions like a shadow. Faces shifted as the story assembled itself in front of them. Denial to discomfort, discomfort to dread. Then I pulled up the approvals. Cooper's name, again and again. Neat, official. He finally snapped. This is misleading, he said loudly. You don't understand operational context. I didn't look at him. I looked at the board. These aren't operational decisions, I said. They're engineered failures. Victor's voice was quiet, deadly. Mr. Cooper, did you approve these contracts? Cooper's mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed. Yes, but, did you disclose your relationships with the entities receiving them? Cooper's face went pale. I clicked to the last step. Financial flows, payment patterns, kickbacks hiding behind service agreements. You built a toll booth inside the network, I said softly, and charged the company to pass through it. The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like a verdict. Cooper pushed his chair back. You're doing this because you hate me, he spat, eyes bright with rage and panic. Victor didn't raise his voice. No, he said, she's doing this because she can see what you thought was hidden. Cooper's gaze flicked to me. Pleading now, just for a second, it made my chest ache in a stupid human way. Then Victor turned to legal. Initiate internal audit, freeze accounts, notify federal authorities. Cooper looked like the floor had fallen out from under him. No, he choked. Victor, please. Victor's eyes didn't move. You should have thought about family before you made her your joke. Cooper's head snapped toward him, stunned, like he couldn't believe the word family could be used against him. He stood shaking. For a moment I thought he might lunge. Instead, he did something smaller. He looked away from me, like I was the betrayal. Afterward, there were no dramatic handcuffs in the room. Just calls, signatures, people moving fast, the way systems do when they finally start correcting. My parents called that night. Dad sounded old, Mom sounded broken. What have you done? Dad whispered. I told the truth, I said. He's your brother, Mom cried. And I was your daughter, I replied, quiet, sharp. But that didn't stop you. They didn't have an answer. They never do. A few weeks later, Victor offered me a position. Director of Strategic Logistics. A title big enough to make my parents suddenly remember I existed. A salary that would have made Mom's friends call me brilliant, without understanding why. I listened. I appreciated it. And I said no. Victor didn't look offended. Why? Because the last thing I wanted was to be owned by one more story, I said. I prefer being the person who sees the system, not the person trapped inside it. Victor studied me, then nodded once. Fair, he said, like respect. We structured a clean, independent contract instead. Boundaries, autonomy, work that spoke for itself. Cooper's situation didn't resolve quickly. It didn't vanish with apologies. It became what it should have been all along, consequences. Investigations, courtrooms, quiet shame that money couldn't buy off. My parents stopped calling when they realized I wouldn't fold, when they couldn't guilt the truth back into hiding. Months later, I drove past that countryside club again. Out of nowhere, like my mind needed to see the place where they tried to make me small. I remembered Cooper's smirk. This is our family failure. Back then, it sounded like a verdict. Now, it sounded like a confession. The last mistake of a man who never understood what I was. Because networks don't care about titles or charm. They don't care about who gets seated at the head table. They care about what works. They care about truth you can measure. And if there's a moral in that, if you need one, it's this. People will label you based on what makes their life simpler. Don't fight the label with speeches. Break it with outcomes, quietly, precisely, and when they finally look up, stunned, and realize what you built without them. Let that silence do the talking.